So I actually work with the Ministry of Justice, the Provincial Ministry of Justice, with Community Safety and Crime Prevention branch. Our branch houses my unit, the Victim Safety Unit. We have a small court support group in some of the courthouses around the Lower Mainland that provides in-court accompaniment as well. So they may work with people who are working with other victim service programs, but that victim service worker is not able to do the court accompaniment part of the work. My branch also houses the Office to Combat Trafficking in Persons, which deals with trafficking of people around the world in some cases, and provides some training and support and information role there. We also house the Crime Victim Assistance Program, not my area of expertise, but I know lots of people are familiar with the program and have generally questions around that. We also have provide some funding through our community program area to help provide funding for police victim services and the community victim services in the province. And you've heard earlier there's a lot of those programs, and it's a very important role, and we work very closely with our partners around the province on that. My unit, the Victim Safety Unit, works closely with both the community and the police-based programs to provide additional information. So our key part of our role is to provide information specifically about someone who is interacting with BC Corrections. Now that's often somebody who's in custody, so they're in a correctional facility for either on remand while they're going through the court process, or if they've been sentenced to a provincial sentence of 2 years less a day or something up to that maximum sentence. We also provide information around bail supervision, so we can provide contact for who's the supervisor, how to contact the supervisor, provide copies of conditions for bail, that sort of information, as well as probation officers who work in community corrections. We can connect families with them. We can provide for provincial offenders, if they're sentenced, information about when they might be eligible for parole. We can provide information about when they're likely to be released, given the statutory requirements for release at certain points, and if they are required to serve their full sentence, when their end of sentence date will be. We also provide information about when probation orders may be ending or bail conditions change. So again, we work closely with the programs, so victim service workers may ask you to register with our office to get any of those notifications. We also work with federal partners, Tara George from Corrections Service Canada and Patrick Story from the Parole Board are the two people that I work with most closely as the managers of those areas. But we have a process in place. If you register with the Victim Safety Unit, there's a small box on our registration form that can be checked that gives us the ability to pass that registration information along to our federal partners if that's an appropriate at some point. So it came about as feedback from victim families over the years and victims about how to help them transition between services without having to go through the process of registering again. Can we start that more streamlined? Can we help facilitate it? So that's one of the things that we find helpful in the work that we do. My own background is I have been a court clerk in Alberta, so have worked in the courtroom, have sat through many trials and listened to the process. I've worked in BC in the Crown Counsel office, both as legal support staff or administrative staff, office manager. At one point I was a Crown Victim Services worker, so when Crown had their own victim service program, I did support people through the process and did court accompaniment with families. And moved into a role with Public Guardian and Trustee at some point, and they can provide some supports to children who've lost their families, their parents for various reasons, and can help get information and support on their behalf. So that was helped me to round out my knowledge around victims and victim issues that can come up, and then I moved into my current role about 4 years ago. So again, we provide notifications. We work with family members to determine what services they want from our office, specifically what services they're receiving from a victim service worker, and if they're not receiving services, how we can help them connect in to get those services that they need. So we refer back as well to programs in the community and who's the appropriate resource for them at any given time. We also have a small victim travel fund. So one of the things that I know family members can struggle with is if the incident involving their loved one happened in a different community than their own, they may want to travel to attend court, and unless they're being called as a witness by Crown Counsel, there's really not a lot of assistance there for families with travel funding. It's not a large fund. We'd like to see it expanded, but it does give access to some funding for some people. There are some criteria for the funding, but I'd be happy later on to answer specific questions about that if you have some. But it's something that's sort of a well-kept secret. We do try and make people aware of it, and as was mentioned earlier, we do work with all of our partners to try and ensure that our information is shared, that we communicate well, that we try and integrate services so that we can do what we can to help support you through the process. We're currently working on a project with the parole officers around provincial offenders. So it's an area that through our partnerships we've identified where victims or victim families aren't perhaps getting information about someone who's being or applied for parole at a provincial level. So there's some information we're trying to gather from family members about what they feel about contact with the offender, so any concerns about contact or proximity, being in their neighborhood, those sorts of things. The provincial offenders are supervised by a parole officer who actually works with Correction Service Canada, and Tara can talk about this a little bit more later. But it's an area that came to our attention fairly recently where there are families who may not be aware that there's a parole application, may not know how they can participate in that process, and we're hoping to address that and fill some gaps. In the last year or two, we've also been trying to provide some supports, again through another project I've been involved with, around findings of not criminally responsible in the review board process that was mentioned earlier, where there are annual reviews of the individual's status before the review board, whether they'll remain at the psychiatric hospital, whether they may be able to be in the community, those sorts of things. Family members may not know that they can attend those hearings, but of course, again, it requires them to come to the Lower Mainland to attend. And we've been trying to look at what supports are there and to see if there's any way to supplement that process for families if they choose to attend. So we are looking at, and we like to get information from sessions like this about what areas are still concerned. Is there anything that we can try and address? As I'm sure you can appreciate, we're not able to address every concern, but at least if we're aware of them, we can keep them at the forefront and try and bring those forward in the appropriate venue to see if we can put in additional supports and services. Thank you.